You tell me, is my lighting
No,
okay?
no.
I got glare, but whatever.
Marty, you got to shut up because we are live.
Hi, live.
It is Thursday, June 18th, 2020, 5 o'clock p.m. Sometimes that little blue go live button works a little too well, and we go live before anyone knows it. Look, it is... the swamp has arrived in Washington. I am sitting outside in the bamboo studio, and it is soupy. I am covered in mosquito bites, and I am reading this.
Money for it?
No, I did not pay money for it. The publisher sent it to me. And so I just want to say, temporary restraining order, preliminary injunction, bring it on. I will expect an order to forget everything I have read or to not speak about everything I have read. And so Judge Lamberth, whose judicial persona I enjoy a great deal, I just want you to know there's a lot of these copies out there. So if you're watching this, Judge Lamberth, just keep in mind that a lot of the litigation that is going on before you right now is entirely hypothetical. The book is out. It is not very good, but it is chock full of amusingly amazing pieces of information. I will just read a couple from page 6. Much was made of Trump's purported dislike of my mustache. For what it's worth, he told me it was never a factor, noting that his father also had one. Other than shrinks and those deeply interested in Sigmund Freud, which I assuredly am not, I don't really believe my looks played a role in Trump's thinking, and if they did, God help the country. Attractive women, however, fell into a different category when it comes to Trump.
I thought he was going to say something about attractive women and his mustache.
No. All right. Here's another one. Trump asked about an NS. This one's specifically dedicated to everyone out there, and you know who you are, who have spent the last 3 years blaming leaks in the Trump administration on Obama holdovers and deep state machinations.
Wait, Ben, I'm just going to cover my ears in case this is classified, okay?
It's not classified.
As far as you
Trump's
know.
That was pretty good, though,
Michael
Marty.
Ellis might have classified it during the pre-publication review.
You're right. So you cover your ears, Marty. Trump asked about an NSC staffer I planned on firing, a supporter of his since the earliest days of the presidential campaign. He wasn't surprised when I told him the individual was part of, quote, the leak problem, unquote. And he continued, quote, too many people know too many things. Look, we are not allowed to have fun anymore. But in lieu of fun, we have Marty Lederman, who knows how to have fun simply by talking about shit in a serious way. Marty, welcome to In Lieu of Fun. Marty is a law professor. He is a longtime Office of Legal Counsel hand. And for everybody who enjoys lawfare, I want to say this about Eugene Volokh, but it is and about Jack Balkin, but it is really true of Marty in a deep way. He is one of the spiritual godfathers of the idea that you can do legal scholarship at the speed of journalism. What we think of as legal blogging is in significant part a personal creation of Marty Lederman, particularly the idea that you can do it on news in real time in a fashion that would satisfy serious legal scholarship requirements. And so, you know, when we started Lawfare, there were really three guiding spirits to it. One was Gene Volokh, one was SCOTUS blog, and the other was Marty Lederman and the work that he was doing with then, he does it now for Just Security, then he was doing it with Jack Balkan. So
I'm still
Marty,
doing a lot of balkanization.
You do a lot of balkanization.
Yeah, I'm still doing a lot. Well, we can stop now. Now that I know I'm your spirit animal, we can just.
No. I said you are the Khamenei to my Ahmadinejad. You're the spiritual leader.
Okay, I wasn't.
Welcome to the show, Marty.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that one. Well, so for those of you who weren't tuned in yesterday, in trying to tout today's program, Ben said that because I was going to be on the show, no one will get a word in edgewise.
Correct.
But I called you pithy.
I took
Marty.
And Kate, on the other hand, called me pithy. She's the first person ever to do so.
Yeah, she would be wrong.
Kate, my last law review article had 869 footnotes for what or something like that. So since this is in lieu of fun, and I want people to get a word in edgewise. I've decided you can only ask me yes or no questions, or questions that can be answered in one sentence or less.
And then you'll answer them in less than 1,000 words.
In less than 10 words.
I would just like to predict that you are not going to last 10 minutes on this project.
Yeah, that might be the first. That might be the first actual drinking game that we'd have on In Lieu of Fun.
Game on, challenge accepted, Marty.
I'll do it, but in fairness to your viewers who are already not having fun, I don't think that would be very much fun.
No, I think if you want to try to go an hour without, you see, I notice that he's not even going to try it. He floated it,
if you'd like,
but he's not going to try it.
If you would like,
it's up to you, dude. I will let the viewers decide whether Marty has refrained from verbosity today.
Okay, let's play 20 questions then.
Okay, what are we playing 20 questions about?
Okay, start wherever you'd like. Well, I mean, I think we ought to start because today is an extraordinary day, right? It's been an extraordinary week with two major decisions in the Supreme Court. And I was saying to someone today, I know a very small handful of people who predicted the plaintiffs would win in the Title VII case, and a very, very small handful of people who thought that the Dreamers would win in the DACA case. And I'm willing to wager there's barely a human alive who would have put money on both of those things happening.
Yeah, I did think that I did not think it was plausible to imagine that the Title VII case would be 6-3. I never imagined Roberts would be there, but after oral argument, I thought Gorsuch was a possibility. I am stunned by the DACA case.
I haven't
read it yet because I've been Boltoning all day. So tell us about it, Marty. How much of it have you read? How and what's the basic outline?
All right, so because Jack Goldsmith and I have been busy writing about this very fast-moving Bolton stuff, not on the merits of the book or the substance, but on the legal challenge to it, which I suppose we'll get into here. I haven't had time. I would usually have read it by 10:10, but I've only had a chance to skim it over. But there's the important part is that the Chief Justice makes a pretty audacious move, one that I don't really think was specifically teed up in any of the briefs, to rule for the Dreamers. Now, most people who thought the Dreamers would lose were basically thinking there were two ways to lose big and lose narrow, three ways to lose. One was the court could hold that it's a non-justiciable challenge. The second was to say that it was within the authority of the Trump administration to rescind DACA and just not reach the question of whether DACA was legal to begin with. That would have been the less disturbing way to lose, because then the Biden administration could reverse it. And the worst case scenario, and the one everyone feared, not everyone, but people I know feared, was that they'd hold that that DACA was not statutorily authorized at all, and then you would need a congressional statute in order to revive it. And instead of any of those three, the Chief Justice doesn't rule that DACA is legal. He reserves on that question. But he rules actually that the way the Trump administration rescinded DACA was arbitrary and capricious under the Administrative Procedure Act. which it probably was, quite frankly. And I think that's the right answer. I just don't think it's one that anyone expected. And then instead of going on to just, everyone thought that if you held it was arbitrary and capricious, you still need to ask whether DACA was legal. And he says we can put that off. So effectively, that takes this off the table as a political issue during the election, which must have been at least, I don't know if it was his motive, but it must have been in Roberts.
Whose motive? Roberts?
John Roberts.
Yeah.
To not make it a political football. And at the same time, he's reserving for himself the possibility that if the program continues into the next administration, the court could still say it was never statutorily authorized, because he reserves on that question. So it's not a complete win, and a statutory ratification or fix would still be ideal if we get a Democratic Congress, and I'm sure it will happen if we get a Democratic Congress. So he's sort of played both sides of the fence, came up with this sort of Solomonic middle ground, and it was, I think most people I've talked to think it was an extraordinarily clever and very.
Do you know who raised that in their briefs?
I don't know. With each of the issues was raised in the briefs, but this particular combination of decisions, which is not to reach the merits, but simply
the arbitrary and
capricious.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all over the briefs, arbitrary and capricious. That's a big part of the briefs. I just don't think anyone expected that. So that he doesn't have to say whether he thinks it's legal. He just basically says do-over and dares them to try to do it over between now and November.
But from
sorry, go ahead, Kate.
Just really quickly, I just wanted to ask, so like, just in terms of, I mean, you said it's not a complete win because he reserves the issue. Obviously, that's true. But like, from a very practical standpoint, I have a lot of friends like who support represent Dreamers right now on various types of things, and we're very happy with this decision. How long could it conceivably take, the fastest it could conceivably take, to get back to Roberts on something like this? So like, how long a reprieve is this for the Dreamers project at minimum?
Without a new statute. I mean, probably not next term, but the term after that, you can imagine.
That's what I was thinking.
You can imagine Texas suing, which is what they threatened to do, and that going through the lower courts in Texas saying, the fact that Dreamers are working in Texas and on the payroll and getting Texas driver's licenses gives us a right to challenge its legality. They've been threatening to do it now. I'm sure they'll do it. I just don't think it'll get up to the Supreme Court next term, but very possibly the term after that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Go ahead, Ben. I'm sorry.
So clever, Solomonic, not a complete win for the challenge, but is it right? I mean, is it like, if we start with the premise that the Supreme Court is, quite apart from the politics of it, supposed to get the right answer, how close to the right answer is this, do you think, for the Supreme Court?
So it's absolutely the right outcome. I filed a brief in the DAPA case, and I did a lot of work on this one and blogged a lot about it. I think there's no question that DACA is statutorily authorized. And in fact, I've been blogging for years now that the real question is not what Roberts calls the forbearance, right? The decision not to remove all these folks from the United States. It's the work authorization that comes with it, right? So generally speaking, Congress in 1986 made it illegal for employers to employ persons who are in the United States without authorization. But there are exceptions to that. And one of the exceptions is if you are given deferred action, which gives you the right to work. That's the big deal. And what Roberts ends up saying is, because that's really what's at stake, the Secretary of HHS could have decided to simply cut off the work authorization. He sends it back for that possibility. I doubt the Trump administration will do that now, but Stephen Miller is still running their immigration policy. So they might think it's a winner for their base, and maybe they will initiate it. On the arbitrary and capricious point, I don't know that your viewers really want to get into that. I do think it was arbitrary and capricious, but the big issue there, this is really in the weeds, was did Secretary Nielsen's ratification of Acting Secretary Duke's rescission did she give enough of a good reason? She gave additional reasons that might have held up, but she claimed not to be doing anything new. It's a very administrative law point that the chief just grabs and runs with. And so he's sending it back for the current head of HHS to decide what should the scope of the rescission be and what are your real reasons.
I guess I will say that I'm surprised by the arbitrary and capricious, even though I saw it all over the briefs. I know how much power in matters of immigration the executive has to like set these types of, and so I just assumed, given the tone of the court and given kind of the political climate, I guess I just thought that those were all like for another type of, like would have been convincing arguments for another type of court, and was a little bit shocked to see Roberts push back on the executive power in this moment.
So I think it's arbitrary and capricious, but for a different reason. Remember, the reason they gave on day one, that Duke gave and Jeff Sessions gave, was a simple one-sentence declaration by Jeff Sessions that DACA is illegal. Well, if it's illegal, of course you have to rescind it. But that was not well thought through. It was contrary to the hundreds of pages of briefs that the Solicitor General has provided the Supreme Court on this question. It was arbitrary and capricious because it was simply wrong on the law. Now, Roberts doesn't want to say that, so he goes this other more sort of technical way of saying that she didn't consider sufficiently the equities on the other side, and that she didn't consider a more tailored kind of rescission focused on work authorization. That can be argued, but I think the answer that it's arbitrary and capricious is correct. And ultimately, I think, of course, that the program is already authorized under the statute, but I would welcome Congress making that clear.
All right, let's turn to...
but it's a great day.
Bolton.
I mean, the practical effect, Kate, is just enormous. The relief felt by these families and
that's kind of what I was
Americans.
focusing.
I mean, let's not get into, we can get into the legal weeds, but like, let's not lose sight of the fact that John Roberts decided here to do something that will improve the life of many Americans.
And for a couple of years,
and many American businesses in ways that are profound.
Yeah, so let's actually pause over that before we turn to National Security Advisor Fest. In the last 3 days, the Conservative Judicial Project has taken a right hook and now a left hook. As you say, some people may have anticipated one. I think very few people anticipated the other, and almost nobody anticipated both. So what does it stand for when you put it together, particularly if you imagine that there's a fifth vote for the idea that some of these subpoenas to the president are enforceable?
That's a big if.
No, but let's acknowledge up front that it looks really different if you get a 5-4 decision saying Trump can say fuck you to everybody on production of
Congress anyway.
Congress, but also the New York DA on his financial.
I've always thought that case is far less important because that information will not become public if it goes to the DA. So
okay, but the point is, it's a very different picture if that case goes for Trump than if that case goes for the parties seeking the information. But let's just take what's happened this week. How much does this say about the larger conservative judicial project? And or is it just, hey, we're talking about a weight of where the conversation is, and the mere fact that we were asking these questions as opposed to other questions reflects a victory of the conservative judicial project?
So you've sort of asked two questions. I heard in your question, maybe, what's Roberts up to, what's he's doing, but then also what does it mean for this conservative judicial movement? As to what's Roberts is up to, I mean, I think he's a very fine lawyer. He cares very much about the court. He takes each case seriously too. He's not just doing things for strategic reasons. I think he believes the vast majority, if not all, of the decisions that he makes are right. And I don't know whether he's trying to take a couple of hot button issues off the table in order to keep them out of the political fray, which would be probably bad for the Republican Party this summer. He has to know that that's the case. But even on these so-called social issues, Ben, we not only have the Trump subpoena cases, if you want to call those sort of hot button social issues, but 3 religion cases and the abortion case still to come. And so, and I have a feeling that of those, that's 5 cases. I wouldn't be surprised if Roberts is with the conservatives on more than half, most of those 5 cases.
I have to say that I'm dreading the abortion case, given actually really oddly given the last couple of cases. I just feel like maybe there has just been
maybe he's buying goodwill for that. But maybe on that one, it's very easy for him to say this is on all fours with whole women's health, and say a lot of nasty things about Roe versus Wade, but strike down the Louisiana statute too, and keep that one out of the political fray as well. He cares much more, it seems to me, about religion, about race, about voting and structural matters like that, and about executive power. Those are the things that really he cares about. Now, Ben, what about the so-called conservative judicial movement? Well, I think this shows that it, like most movements, it's not, it's multivalent. It's got many different components to it. Some judges and lawyers and supporters and politicians who favor it for some reasons and others for other reasons. And the moral component of Trump's support, and especially the part of his moral base that cares about judicial decision making, is not happy with these 2 cases. They might be very happy with the 3 religion and the abortion cases that are going to be coming up. And others, Federalist Society types, might think he got it wrong. They might think that Gorsuch and Roberts aren't being, true to their textualist bona fides, but they don't have a big stake in the outcomes of this. In fact, they're probably in support of LGBT rights and the Dreamers being here, right? Just as a substantive matter, this is not bothering that part of the coalition. And so it's really been interesting just in these 72 hours to watch the sky is falling post. Hadley Arcus just wrote this extraordinary screed on First Things, and Josh Hawley on the floor of the Senate, I think, about this is the end. It was a failure. Forget originalism, forget textualism. We need a moral court, and this isn't it. They might be singing a different tune in a couple weeks, but I think they're only part of the coalition. Now, it could be that for political matters, losing part of the coalition makes a big difference. You need to hold it all together because they don't have a huge majority in terms of popular electoral votes. But I'm the last person to know how it's going to affect politics.
I just think that there's a lot of I think you're dead right about Roberts and voting and race and I think that that's completely correct. That's not his issue, but I do think that I don't know. I guess I just don't want to get hopeful by that just because there's no it's correlation, not causation, or there's none. I don't know. It's what's the fallacy of one good thing happens and so you expect another good thing to happen or something like that. I just don't.
It's turned up heads 10 times in a row. It's still
right. Exactly. That's the fallacy. Exactly. And then so you run to the black.
That's the Latin term for it. Yeah.
You run to the roulette wheel because it's been black 25 times in a row, and you bet on red because it's got to be. But
we're not going to see that. What's interesting to me is that Roberts, with the 2 Affordable Care Act decisions, Sebelius and King versus Burwell, the census case, and now these 2. At this point, he's not worried about, he's already lost friends, I suppose, in certain circles, and they're not coming back. They're not going to support him. And he's admired by others, including many of us who don't agree with him on a lot of things, just, because we do think he's a thoughtful, serious lawyer and cares about the court. So I might have very deep disagreements with him. But, I don't think there's a lot of love on either side, and I think he's okay with that. I think he seems to be acting that way, as though
it's not about love.
It's not about love, right? That's right. His true friends will be friends, and the people that respect him will respect him. And in the meantime, he's trying to do the right thing for the court and the country by his lights, which aren't mine.
And he's the Chief Justice of the United States.
He's the Chief Justice
and the swing vote on the court, which means everybody who's got an objection can put it where the moon don't shine, right?
Well, I guess so. I mean, none of us likes to feel that way. I mean, the fact that he's going to be criticized by a large number of people on all 10 or 12 of these hot button cases this term, there's going to be a lot of people who don't like what he does in every single one of those cases.
I get it, but that's kind of what he signed up for. And
yes, exactly. He knows what.
And
right.
I feel like
John Roberts is a big boy.
Exactly.
And John Roberts' entire life has been building for this moment. So like, let's also remind ourselves of that not the moment of like him making enemies, but just like, I think, as you said, Marty, and I completely agree, he's just a very serious jurist. He takes this very seriously. He respects the institution. He respects, and so I just think that there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, I would actually say that was the thing that when his confirmation hearing was happening and I was, disappointed and like kind of and worried about what, obviously Roe, that like, that was a comfort to me kind of to a certain extent, because I just felt like he was an intellectually honest person.
Yes. I mean, but he's a common law jurist, and he's a lawyer. He was one of the best lawyers in town before he was on the court, and he continues to play the role of a lawyer, and he thinks that's appropriate as a judge, and I tend to think so too, even when in cases like, gerrymandering and race and others, I'm deeply opposed to how he comes out on things. So,
all right, let's shift gears, because there are not one, not two, but three separate national security advisors we need to talk about. Should we do it in alphabetical order, in order of service, or in order of criminality? Like, how do you prioritize?
Yeah, so I assume that you mean Bolton, Flynn, and O'Brien to be alphabetical about things. Susan Rice is in the news too a lot these days. Speaking of,
it's true. So maybe we can do four national security advisors, although we might have to sing the Sesame Street song, one of these things is not like the others.
Yeah, maybe. We can bring
the one with the mustache. Is it the one with the mustache?
No, I was thinking it was the one who's a Democratic African-American woman, but
who had a good long tenure in her job and acted responsibly as national
committed no crimes that have that we know of, is not being sued by the federal government, whose money is not going to be impounded, and whose name you don't have to say with a disgusted cough. Ben,
can I just say that that sort of raises one of the broader topics that maybe we'll get to if we have time, which is, we all think that, and most of your audience probably thinks that. But if you had everyone on here, it would be Susan Benghazi Rice, right?
Yes, that's correct. So let's reserve that question for the end.
Yeah.
But let's because I do think you and I have both been obsessed with that question for a while, and I do think we should talk about it.
Polarization. Yeah.
But and also just does any of this shit that we do matter question.
Yes,
but let's start with, let's just go through the national security advisors, and let's dispense with the Democrat first.
The one thing I'm sure of, Ben, is, Kate, this podcast matters. The rest of it, I don't know.
Because at least we're substituting for fun. Like, these people who can't have any fun, at least they can do this.
Right.
All right, let's talk about Susan Rice. Is she going to be the vice presidential nominee?
I think it's very possible. I don't have any expertise
in
this, so I'm curious what you guys think.
What?
I think she would be, let me put it this way, I think she would be a superlative vice president. I haven't the foggiest idea what kind of a candidate she would be, or whether that matters. I mean, I thought Tim Kaine was going to be a great vice president.
Yeah, so did I.
He turned out to be an empty suit, or that's how it was perceived, and perception is everything. And so I don't have any idea whether she will be chosen or whether she'd be a good candidate if she were. I do think my sense of Joe Biden is that he wants someone who he could trust to step in as president, someone that he thinks would play the role to him that he did to Obama as a trusted advisor, and someone serious about especially foreign affairs and national security. And he trusts her. And I think she would be a superlative partner and vice president. But I'm the last person to ask about what the odds are on her being chosen.
What do you think, Kate?
I have thought for a long time that Stacey Abrams would just be like just phenomenal.
Did you notice she wasn't on the short list that was ballooned?
I did, and I was very disappointed.
That was the thing that was most striking to me. Was
that she wasn't even on the list.
That had to be deliberate, but I'm not sure what it means.
And I also happened to know that she was like being considered and took her name out of like consideration for the Facebook Oversight Board, assumedly in part because of like this type of like of the political. So like
I want to make the argument that is right. So no disrespect to Stacey Abrams, but if you are Joe Biden and you are 77 years old and you need somebody who can, at any moment that heart disease calls or at any moment that an aneurysm happens, 77, the actuarial tables say with every year that passes, the likelihood that something bad happens goes up, not a little bit, but a lot. And you need somebody who can walk in, who's not there who's there in a capacity that they can step in right away. Somebody who has no experience in the foreign policy and national security space, and whose only experience in the federal government space is in kind of voting rights advocacy. I think, and who doesn't even have executive experience at the state level, I think there is a pretty strong argument that person is inappropriate. Now,
Barack Obama, he had 2 years as
I was just going to say that.
Great minds, Kate.
Well, so first of all, if the question was Barack Obama qualified in a formal sense, the answer is no.
No, Kate and I are suggesting that formal qualifications aren't as important when it comes to me.
Yep, that's exactly what I just don't think that that's a thing that exists.
So I agree with you that there are people who, absent formal qualifications, can perform admirably. But if you are if you are Joe Biden and you are saying which of the many highly qualified female, or even if you're limiting it to the women of color, do I want? I look at Susan Rice and I say, and Stacey Abrams next to each other and say, oh, that's an easy call.
I just think that there's something about her intellect. Like, I just think that Stacey Abrams has like a sharper managerial savvy. I guess
Susan Rice.
Yes.
Oh, Susan's got a pretty.
Really?
Susan's bright.
Oh yeah.
She's.
I said a managerial savvy. Like, I just think that like Stacey, but she is okay. I mean,
very much. Oh yeah. Her book demonstrates it. It's really.
And Susan has run the NSC, which is a big part of running the White House.
Right.
And I think there's a.
But that's as to who would make the best vice president. Obviously, the other consideration is, one of them is, would any choice do better than others at, for instance, attracting voters in Milwaukee and Detroit?
Or Atlanta.
Well, if we win Georgia, I don't think we have to worry about Detroit. But yes, or Atlanta or Phoenix, which is a different consideration, perhaps, right? But I don't know. Is the answer to that.
All right. Next national security advisor, O'Brien.
So wait, hold on 1 second. Who were the other people on the short list? I know that Stacey wasn't on it, but who was on it? Marty's.
I think we may have lost Marty.
I'm back now, but if it goes in and out, I just have one, an archaic laptop. Okay.
It's okay. So who else was on the short list? Kate asks.
Well, Val Demings was on, and Kamala Harris, and Elizabeth Warren, and one or two others.
I think the governor of New Mexico.
Yes, yeah.
By the way, who I think there's a real case for her. which is that she is a former public health commissioner of New Mexico. New Mexico has done a surprisingly good job with COVID-19. And if you're trying to do that desert Southwest thing, make a play for Arizona, having a governor who has done a really good job with COVID-19, there's a lot to be said for that.
But then and Gretchen Whitmer was kind of like mentioned at the end of the list, but that would be even more so, right? She's been extraordinarily popular in Michigan for her handling of COVID and other things.
And I'm just not completely sure I understand why you guys think that. I mean, I'm just not kind of like understanding like why you would be pro Susan Rice versus. I mean, I understand that Ben thinks qualifications. Marty and I agree that it's about electability and kind of.
Kate, I actually think it matters who would be the better vice president and potential president too. And I don't know about Stacey Abrams. I'm very confident that Susan Rice would be a very fine executive official.
Well, yeah, then I take that seriously.
To be clear, I don't know anything about how Stacey Abrams would perform. I know that she does not have the background that particularly gives you confidence that she knows her way around the United States national security process. Now, that is something you could learn. And if you imagine that she's serving as vice president for 4 months, that is about for 4 years, that is about the best training you could imagine for that. On the other hand, if you imagine that she's serving as vice president for 4 months, and then suddenly becomes president, I do not love that for a lot of reasons, including that I wouldn't want Joe Biden to drop dead in 4 months. But I do think you have to think about that with a 77-year-old in a way that you don't when the candidate is much younger. All right, this time for real. Next National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien. Marty, go.
Oh boy, coming in the back way. Well, we can only talk about O'Brien. The only thing I want to say about O'Brien is his small but important role in the Bolton affair. So
small but important. I thought that sentence was going to end differently.
Okay, all right. So let's back into O'Brien by talking about Bolton. We did a whole we've talked a lot about Bolton. I am working my way through the book. We'll write a review of it for Lawfare.
I'm very sorry.
It is a slog. I will not confirm or deny that I had trouble staying awake this afternoon. Tell me your Bolton thoughts.
So I'm going to summarize, but I would really, if you guys think they're good, commend what Jack and I wrote yesterday and what we're going.
It was excellent.
What we're going to
I just pulled it up. It's on my reading list for.
So this is not about the quality of John Bolton as a national security advisor or as a thinker or as an author or anything else. This is purely about the government's effort to stop the publication of this book, which is slated for Tuesday, although Ben has used his time travel machine to get it already.
It is right here. Here it is, the book.
Yeah. I think
if anybody wants to know what's on any,
should be going into a court to enjoin it for copyright violation. But
if anybody wants to know what's on any particular page of it, just we can read it. Go for it, Marty.
So the legal questions we've been looking at are, so the short version is Bolton presents his manuscript to the National Security Council. And like everyone who's worked at NSC or in the intelligence community, he had to sign non-disclosure agreements in order to get access to classified information. And we all signed those at various levels. And we promised never to disclose in an unauthorized way any classified information that we learned in the government for the rest of our lives. And he did too. And in order to get into certain code word or SCI, secured compartmentalized information materials, he had to promise that anytime he wrote anything, he had to submit it for a pre-publication review if it had any SCI in it, any secured compartmentalized information or information that is, this is a vague term, related to SCI. His lawyer and he claimed that his manuscript didn't trigger these restrictions, but in an abundance of caution, they submitted it to the NSC for a review. And sure enough, the career official there and her office, her stable of folks, went over it with this 570 pages with a fine-tooth comb. Maybe it was 700 pages then, Ben. And they said, we think a lot of this stuff is classified. And they, for 3.5 months with Bolton, they went back and forth in many meetings and emails and the like, with proposed redactions and counter proposals and the like. Really an extraordinary iterative process in which he took out a lot of stuff he wanted to keep in there. Finally, on April 27th, she decides that the manuscript, that is what Ben's holding in his hand, contains no classified information. And she tells him that she's concluded that, but also says, you know, I'll give you the letter of approval, but it's got to, you know, go through the process at NSC. You know, it's got to get approved. And then it's just crickets. He doesn't hear anything. And he and his lawyer and his publisher, Simon & Schuster, decide, well, we're going ahead. We've been through the ringer here. We think we've had to redact too much already, and no one has said anything. And she concluded there's nothing left that's classified. So they plan to publish it on Tuesday. They send out advance copies. Ben's got one, etc. At which point the government says to him, what are you doing? We haven't given you the letter of approval yet. And what do you know? We did another review for classification over the last 5 weeks. Turns out it's chock full of classified information. And we learned last night, they even claim it contains secure compartmentalized information, SCI, the highest form of classification. Therefore, you can't publish it for 2 reasons. One, you promised you wouldn't publish anything until it went through this review, and we haven't finished. And 2, you promised you wouldn't disclose any classified information, and it's there, so you can't do it. His lawyer writes back and says, this is ridiculous. You're obviously doing this for political reasons. And what we've learned in the last 48 hours is what happened was, after the NSC office that said it's no longer contains classified information was done, Robert O'Brien, circling back, Robert O'Brien said,
National Security Advisor number 3 in this conversation.
Yes, National Security Advisor number 3 said, I don't know if he actually looked at it, but he claims, or the DOJ claims that he said, I've looked at this book, and I think there's classified stuff in here. So I'm assigning a new person to do a new classification review, Michael Ellis. I'm not going to go deeply into Michael Ellis. What viewers of this podcast need to know is he was a Devin Nunes guy who is now in.
He worked for Devin Nunes and was let's just say well placed in that role.
He was well placed in that role. He's now been in NSC, and he's the one that allegedly put the transcript of the Zelensky conversation in the lockbox in the White House. He was involved in that as well. Anyway, he's never done any classification functions or declassification review or pre-publication review, but nevertheless, he does his own. And he says it's chock full of classified information, or at least 6 passages, one of which is SCI. And therefore, he tells Bolton, you can't publish it. And they sue. The United States sues Bolton to stop him from publishing it, and claims that, as a matter of fact, if that injunction issues, it will apply as well to Simon & Schuster and booksellers throughout the nation, even though they aren't.
But not to me.
Well, Ben, unless you become a commercial bookseller between now and Tuesday.
I'm just going to live tweet the whole book.
Well, it's kind of like Mike Gravel on the floor of the Senate, right?
One little fair use snippet at a time.
Right, Ben, and you could just start reading the Pentagon Papers into a podcast too, right? Okay, so anyway, and so it looks as though O'Brien and Ellis, at Trump's behest, this is what everyone assumes, just started classifying stuff that had not been previously classified. But the SCI stuff had to have been classified before Ellis got to it, because he doesn't have the authority to classify SCI, if it was in fact classified. So they've gone in, they get Royce Lamberth, as you mentioned. Lamberth happens to be the one federal judge in the nation who's actually made a public speech saying, I think the government dramatically overclassifies things, and that federal judges are far too deferential to the federal government when it comes to classification.
And he was the presiding judge of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, who once banned an FBI agent for life from testifying in the FISA court ever again. Royce Lamberth is a passionate guy.
He may not be sympathetic to Bolton. He might think this is a pox on both your houses. But I think so.
He sounds like a Jack Weinstein.
I call
He's
this
the furthest thing from
I call
Jekyll.
this battle the Iran-Iraq War.
Okay. All right. In any event, we don't know. So here's the interesting thing. I don't know of a pure case in which, there are probably one or two out there, in which a federal judge has ever, it's supposed to be de novo review of the classification decisions. A federal judge has never actually reversed a classification decision, I don't think. Either never or rarely. But we might have a perfect storm here, right? Because we have Royce Lamberth. We have a process that looks really screwy, in which the process worked as it's supposed to. The author goes through all of this hard work to redact, gets to the point where the career officials say it's okay. And then lo and behold, these, very passionate pro-Trump folks in the NSC say, aha, we've discovered new classified information. And it's all, and I wish that, so Lambert's going to have a public hearing at 1 p.m. tomorrow afternoon, which you can call in and listen to. And that'll probably be fun, but the classified hearing, if he has one, will probably be quite something, but none of us will hear that one, probably, ever. And so this might be a first, right, where a court actually says, I don't agree with the classification decisions of federal officials. And he's got the DNI supporting him now, Ellis. He's got the head of the NSA saying that signals intelligence will be disclosed. Now, Ben's point is right. There is an issue here about, you can't put this, which metaphor do we want to use, Ben? Horse back in the stable? I don't know.
Yeah.
But you definitely can put a horse back in the stable. Like, that's the thing you can do.
Genie back in the bottle.
Because
back in the tube.
Because if Ben knows all these secrets now, so do all our foreign allies and adversaries. Okay, so they know it, and so the harm is done.
Are you suggesting, Marty, that my tradecraft is not better than that of our foreign intelligence adversaries?
You just said you're going to tweet the whole book in fair use segments. Anyways, Marty,
Ben,
by the way, this is why I called you
about
pithy, because you just summarized an incredibly complicated thing and did so very, very in a story-like way that was very dead on. And I thought
it was awesome, Marty.
Yes.
Which brings us to National Security Advisor number 4. I think we're going to rename this a tale of 4 national security advisors. Michael Flynn.
Okay, so
what gives?
One what's the takeaway? By the way, I hate that phrase, but in academia now you have to say it. The takeaway on Bolton is it's really up for grabs what Lamberth's going to do. Nothing would be surprising. So okay, Michael Flynn. So I've blogged at excruciating length about the saga of Michael Flynn. Ben and others have helped me understand it and remember some of it going back to 2016 and beyond, in which my main theme has been that this whole contretemps now about the government's effort to withdraw or dismiss the single charge to which he pled guilty is sort of it's a feint, it's a diversion from what's really important. But it's being used to try to drive one narrative in a clash between two fundamental narratives about Trump and Russia and the deep state and that sort of thing. And we shouldn't really care whether Michael Flynn's charge is withdrawn or not. I mean, you can care a little bit. I don't think he'll spend any time in jail. He'd be pardoned even if he were convicted. And good riddance to him. I don't care whether he spends any time in jail, notwithstanding that he was responsible for the grotesque lock her up speech at the Republican convention, or so rallying cry. So what's really important and striking and disturbing is that the Attorney General of the United States and the Justice Department are now arguing, trying to make it seem as though what Flynn did was not only unexceptional and not worth investigating, but was laudable, in Bill Barr's words, and that more broadly, the entire FBI investigation, the whole Russia investigation, the entire Crossfire Hurricane investigation, why did they choose Jumping Jack Flash as their source of their code name there? I don't know, but was illegitimate, right? Was this deep state attack on Donald Trump, and was not based in any real concerns, despite the fact that the entire intelligence community and law enforcement communities thought that it was. So what I tried to do was to go, sort of soup to nuts from the summer of 2016 to the present day and explain all of the things that various people have done that were much worse than Michael Flynn's lie to the FBI for which he's being charged, including the way the Justice Department has handled that charge and what Bill Barr is saying and what Donald Trump did. And I do, as Ben knows, I also am very critical of Jim Comey and the FBI. I don't think it was right to interview Flynn the way they did on January 24th. 2017, I think Sally Yates was absolutely right in doing what she eventually did, which was go to Don McGahn with that information, which led quickly to Flynn's removal from his position. I don't to this day quite understand why the FBI did it, but the picture the government is now trying to paint in its briefs is that the reason they're withdrawing the charge, the principal reason now they're sort of shifting their rationale, is to teach the FBI a lesson. And it's tainted by the FBI having done a perjury trap and more broadly being out to get Michael Flynn and Donald Trump. And this is sort of payback for that. We're not going to allow a conviction to be on the books for a lie during an interview that should never have occurred, but for the malfeasance on the 7th floor of the FBI or something. I think it's the 7th floor. So that theme is what bothers me. And that's part of the broader thing that Ben and I have been worried about, which is that each of these incidents that we think are deeply troubling and corrosive, Ukraine, Russia, everything else, with the revelations about China in the Bolton book, just immediately become subject to a dueling narratives where there is no common ground at all and no one's views can be changed or bridged. And that's where we are now. And so I thought it was hysterical last night, MSNBC, like big banner headlines, Bolton accuses Trump of making foreign policy decisions in order to advance his own personal agenda.
Like no shit.
Whoa!
What a shocker!
I'm going to go buy that book because that's something I didn't. There's none of this at this point. Ukraine, the Bolton revelation, there is no such thing as a revelation. Everything we learn about Donald Trump is consistent with what everyone really has known about him for at least 4 years. And the problem is that 43% or so of the electorate does not care, or worse, thinks it's a virtue rather than a bug, and that the entire Republican Party is okay with it. So it's just weird. We continue to do this. We tweet, we do podcasts, we are reporters, we publish books, right, we're thinking we're back in 1974. And if you reveal the wrongdoing of the president, the sky will fall. And that's just not where we are. Like, none of this has any impact.
I completely agree with that. And I actually think the only downside that the Bolton book will have is that it fools liberals into thinking that this type of stuff matters. Like, they've turned Bolton, like the Republicans have turned Bolton into the enemy already. I just think that there's no way that we are going to enjoy the petty, inside the room bullshit about like Bolton's mustache and Trump trying to get him to shave it and like all of this stuff. And like, it's just not going to matter.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care about that. Just like I thought it was a real mistake for people to make a big issue of Trump with the water glass and the ramp and that sort of thing. That's not the problem. The problem is his character and his conduct, and the fact that his party, we've gotten to the point really that if he shot anyone on Fifth Avenue, as long as it was in Manhattan and not Fifth Avenue in Topeka or something, it would be completely fine and no one would care about it. And that's a bigger problem. The problem isn't Donald Trump. The problem is that
someone's actually
the stories that truly are important and that I would have thought 5 or 10 years ago would have been deeply disturbing, and that Ben has written, very eloquently about.
Yeah, unmade presidency, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, Ben wrote a whole book about it.
I know.
It's not going to be made into All the President's Men. It just doesn't have that feel of, like, yes, of course, the guy's the most transparent human being we've ever known in terms of what drives him, how he works, and the like. None of this is remotely surprising, but none of it seems to affect anyone's view of whether he and his party should be running the government or not.
So I want to make the case that it matters.
Well, we have
and
to keep
again,
doing it, right? We need
no. I want to
something.
make the case that it actually matters, but I want to let Lance Garber ask his question first because it relates back to the Flynn case directly. So,
Yeah.
Lance, on National Security Advisor number 4, you have a yes or no.
If you can bring in Henry Kissinger, you can bring in Henry Kissinger.
A yes or no question for Marty, but you got to unmute yourself.
You don't have that capability, Kate.
Lance.
Wait, what?
I did.
Oh, there he is.
There you go. There you go. Well, yeah. Back when you were asking for yes or no questions, I simply asked whether or not you thought Judge Sullivan would grant DOJ's motion. But I do have a more specific question with respect to his ruling. If he were to grant the motion, I'm curious as to the law or rules that might govern whether or not he ruled with or without prejudice. Are there rules or guidance for the judge in that circumstance? And that was my question.
I don't think there's very much case law on that. I mean, he's been, and for those of you who, the government is asking him to dismiss the charge against Flynn with prejudice, which means that a Biden administration would not be able to revive the charge. I don't think anyone's going to revive any charge anyway, so I'm not sure that it matters. Could he grant the motion but say it's without prejudice to renew? Yeah, sure, he could do that. I think it's more likely that if Michael Flynn were ever prosecuted in the future, it would be about his Turkey-related matters and the FARA violations rather than his lie to the FBI in this interview. But my main point is, like, don't worry about those weeds. I've written 10,000 words on them, but the weeds are important, but don't lose sight of the bigger picture here.
I largely agree with that. I do think it's a little bit more likely than Marty seems to that a future administration would decide to revive these charges for the following reason. If you are incoming Attorney General Sally Yates or Preet Bharara, or take your pick of likely future Democratic attorneys general, you are confronted with a person who had a very significant criminal exposure, as did his son, reached a plea deal, was allowed to plead down to a single, relatively insignificant 1001 charge, then used his political connections to turn the entire Justice Department upside down to get them to abusively dismiss that. By the way, at significant expense to some career prosecutors and their, internal stature within the department. And I do think that he has violated his plea agreement. And normally when you violate the plea agreement, the Justice Department comes at you pretty hard. And so I think the equity is on the department's part to say, okay, the fact that he did this with the aid of the President of the United States and the Attorney General of the United States is an aggravating factor, not a mitigating factor. And we are going to, file every charge against him that we would have filed had he not reached this plea agreement. So including, by the way, the 1001 charge. So I am a little bit agnostic about how a future justice.
I just think there's a lot of work to do come January 20th, God willing, and I'd like to put all this behind us. But that's very Obama-like, I guess.
Yeah, so I am like that's a macro policy decision, and yeah. I would feel differently about this if Joe Biden said something Solomonic like that we want to look forward, not backward, and some of the things that Obama said. I would feel very differently about this. But I think if you come into this and you look at it, if you look at it from the traditional point of view of the prosecutorial equities of the United States, there's a good case for throwing the frickin' book at Michael Flynn. Sorry?
No, that I don't disagree with that.
So, Marty, we got to wrap up, but I want to make the case to you that all this stuff does matter. Marty and I agree with you.
We have to keep doing it because we have very little choice. That's all we know how to do. But whether do you think it matters with this seemingly fluctuating 1.5%, between 41 and 43%? Or
no, I agree with Marty in this. Like, this is why I've kind of like, I don't know. I'd be interested in your case.
So here's my case. If you look at the 538 average of polls over the life of the Trump presidency, the actual fluctuation is the core of it is between about 40 and about 44%.
Yep.
But the actual fluctuation is greater. After Charlottesville, at the time of in the period of the height of the Russia investigation and Charlottesville, it was down in the 36% range. And at the height of Trump's popularity, which was weirdly the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, when some people who I have never met thought rallying behind the president as he was making those giving those briefings seemed like an appropriate thing to do. It was
there is a very small pro-bleach lobby, Ben. So.
Apparently so. All the bleach drinkers who were previously Biden supporters, like migrated briefly to the president. That said, if you take the total range of fluctuation, it's really between about 36% and about 46%. So it's a 10% range at its maximum. Taking Marty's point that most of the time it's a 2 or 3% range, it's actually at the extremes more than that. And if you look at the 538 average now, it's down below 41%. And
Ben,
so,
also, do you remember we talked about this after the riots, and remember you were really excited by this number. I remember it was at 32%. And that was the first time we'd ever see it go significantly below 36. Well, so 32% approval.
32% approval of his handling of that issue, not his overall.
Yes.
But,
sorry. Yes.
But I think that the aggregate conversation matters. And look, primarily this is driven by situations, right? Right now it is depressed by a combination of economic collapse, COVID-19, and the George Floyd reactions on the president's part. And so the conversation that we have about rule of law does not push it down. That is not a material factor in it. Here's what it is a material factor in. It prevents it from going above certain levels. And I think reminding a certain group of people who might be sympathetic to policy, who might be, I want to actually put a name on this group of people. This is the George Conway faction. And these are the people who say, I believe in a lot of the policy. I'm sympathetic to the judges. I believe in deregulation and I don't like paying taxes, but this stuff just disgusts me and I can't do it.
So I agree with that, Ben, but I just wonder, but I think those people, including George, got off the Trump train early in 2017 because they saw what he was.
Right.
It's not like, oh my God, the Mueller revelations, that's what did it for me. Oh my God, Ukraine. Oh my God, right? It's like, of course.
But it is the constant, and I don't want to suggest that George would get back on the train, but for this, because George is as passionate about this as you or I are. But it is the constant repetition of rule of law themes that prevents a certain drift back by a certain group of people. And I think that accounts for the ceiling at 46%, that the ceiling is very hard and it's not glass, it's steel. And one of the explanations for that ceiling, I think, is rule of law concerns about Donald Trump. And I can't prove that to you, but I do believe it.
I agree with that. I mean, I agree with that. He prevents, he wouldn't have a much higher, he would give at certain points during his tenure, he would have had a much higher approval rating.
That's why it matters.
So It does, but it's just each one of these, getting all worked up about it. You and I wrote this long piece about how even if they don't convict him, the one thing they shouldn't do is say that what he did with Ukraine was okay. Well, they did.
It was okay, and that's exactly what they did.
That's what they did, and the world just kept on going exactly as it had been. And what really seems to be unnerving people now isn't any of those things: the foreign affairs, the lying, the grotesque, the grotesque way he presents himself publicly and online, and those sorts of things. It's that finally we had a couple of crises all at the same time. And everyone realizes the guy is not remotely capable of dealing with true necessity, right? Where the federal government is a non-issue. That's, I'm sure you guys have had episodes about that. I mean, the most incredible thing to me about COVID, of many incredible things, is we're back to 1918. The federal government is just irrelevant. It's like before the New Deal, before the administrative state. And I just find that to be just utterly shocking. Maybe it's better than if this administration were involved. But
no,
but anyway,
I
that's frightening people, right? It's frightening people when they actually think, my goodness, there are times when the government ought to be able to do something. This guy's completely incapable of doing it. And I don't think they relish another 4 years of that, I hope.
Yeah, I do think that one of the things that happened with COVID, I completely agree. I was like, what is this? What is the long-term? Well, first of all, I was like, what is the long-term effect of this on online speech? Because online speech has been this exception to all other types of, oh my gosh. Ben, you made a poll.
All right. It's up for
great. I can't fucking vote. This is such bull. I'm so disenfranchised. Oh God.
I missed all that. I was frozen, but I'm sure you said something wonderful, Kate.
No, probably not. But I just was saying that basically, one of the things, there were two things that struck me, is that COVID was changing everything. And one was that it was making the caveat that I'm always talking about when I give talks and everything about online speech, is that it's just this isn't about online speech anymore. This is about all speech. It completely takes, if every single one of our interactions is happening through a private entity like Zoom or Facebook or Twitter, then that just is speech. And it's not really about you don't have to even almost caveat it with online anymore.
None of us is trying. We're not trying to influence anyone. I mean, everyone is in an echo chamber, and everyone's kind of come to terms with that, right? There's no way of moving anyone because
no, I am totally every day trying to move people, and
I know. It's lovely.
I will defend trying to move people. And I go out to my cabin in the woods, and I'm surrounded by, the liberal houses only have Trump stickers, yard signs. The conservative houses also have Confederate flags. And I want to persuade every single one of them.
Ben Sisyphus Wittes, yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's a really good, that's perfect. But
all right, so we still have some people out there who haven't voted. If you have, we've only had 70% voter turnout. If you're not going to vote in this poll, how can we trust you to vote in November?
Okay, hold on. So let me finish. That was what I was going to say, is that at the end of the day, because of COVID, I think we are going to see an election like we have never seen before, because of the hardship of actually voting, because of the fear of voter fraud, because of electoral mail-in ballots, between all of these things. Okay. And I think that what's going to really be the thing is that that 38, that 40% is going to have to get off their asses and walk to, or go and wait in line to vote for Trump again. But if there is a tinge of kind of complacency, or a tinge of he's really fucked this all up, I think it'll keep them home, because they don't want to risk things. They don't want to play along. Maybe you think that I'm wrong, but I'm looking at the people around me who vote for Trump and the people I know, and that's how I'm seeing them react in this moment.
I hope you're right, Kate. I actually think what's important, obviously it's important if Trump wins, it's a disaster, but assuming Biden wins, I think what's really important is what you guys were discussing with Bill Kristol, and I'm sure you've done it on other episodes, which is, what happens to the 1,000 or 2,000 Republican elected officials and decision makers and pundits who have been with Trump all along, right? Are they forever sort of exiled from respectability, or are they just back to being an ordinary minority party? And where do the Never Trumpers go? Because there's no home for them. And if there is, if the Senate does turn and Biden wins, how much can Biden and the Congress get done in the first 18 months before we end up back in some other cesspool?
So let's leave it. Let's leave it here. But I want to ask you about that. What you think? No. Like you are I would describe you as a mainstream, passionate liberal. Is that fair? You're not a leftist. You're not. You're
all three of those things, but I don't know which order I would put them in. Yes.
Fine. I don't want to fight with you about order. Would you welcome Bill Kristol in the Democratic Party?
Would I welcome Bill Kristol? Sure.
I mean, like if the Never Trumpers move, become a kind of conservative flank, not a geographic conservative like the Blue Dogs, sort of Southern Democrats, but a philosophical conservative flank of the Democratic Party. Is that, from your point of view? I mean, whenever Bill tweets something, people say, "But you did this," "But you'd," right? There's like, "But you." How do you feel about welcoming the Never Trumpers into the Democratic Party?
As you know, Ben, I don't think it matters, because I think this is like 1,000 or 2,000 people, and they're not going to have any influence in the Democratic Party. I welcome them. I hope they do see that the Democratic Party is the only solution right now, but I don't. And so I'm happy to have them register as Democrats and continue to have voices. And I, like you, even though I have a lot of problems with folks like Bill Kristol. I mean, George Conway and I were in law school together, and we couldn't have been more oil and water. But
and I love that both of you, when I tweeted that, both of you said, and neither of us have changed our views on anything substantial.
Well, there you go. But we found a common ground, nevertheless. Thank God for Donald Trump for finding our common ground. Yes, I mean, welcome. I welcome John Roberts voting the way he did this week. That doesn't mean I'm not going to be very critical of him when he does things that I'm deeply opposed to. Same with Bill Kristol. But I don't know how this is all going to spin out. Does the Republican, all this talk about, does the Republican Party reinvent itself? It can't reinvent itself around 2,000 inside the Beltway people. There's no other electorate out there. It would take some time, I think, to create a new sort of party from part of what will be the Democratic coalition now in order to create a new Republican Party. But that's not why you invited me on here. You're supposed to get, Bill
Marty,
Bill didn't know what was to come, right? He didn't.
We have invited you on here because you're so good looking, Marty.
Yeah.
Marty, we have
I finally got a haircut. My family tells me I look like, it's like the North Korean cut, they call it. So,
Marty, we have polled the voting base. We have the results.
Who drafted the questions?
I did, of course.
Of course you did. It shows you the answers. Marty, nothing matters.
LOL, nothing matters.
A caricature. As anyone who knows me, Ben, you will vouch that I think, if anything, I think too much matters.
I think nothing matters. That was me.
No, I think it's. But you did say, like, if you shot somebody on Fifth Avenue,
in that respect, I don't think there's very much that can change more than 7 Americans' minds about Donald Trump. That's all I mean by nothing matters. I don't mean we should all go home and stop fighting.
So with that, with the knowledge, this is like we end on a point of like almost samurai, like it's where Camus and a samurai crash into each other. We know the fight is. We know that the fight is impossible. We know that we will be slain, and it will not matter. Will not change more than 7 voters' mind, and yet we fight on. Marty Lederman, it's been a pleasure. Other people got a word in edgewise, so I stand corrected.
I didn't stick to my pledge.
No, you certainly didn't.
No, but I'm
Um,
very glad you didn't. Yes. That was
And
excellent.
Marty-
Thanks for coming.
That would have been very Beckett-like or Zen-like, right? To just
We covered the Supreme Court, 2 major decisions, 4 national security advisors, 1 book by John Bolton, and the state of our debate and whether anything matters and whether anything can shake Donald Trump. Approval ratings. Kate, who do we have for tomorrow?
Don't forget 3 turtle doves, right? Yeah,
And
And a partridge in a pear tree.
Yeah. Who do we have for tomorrow, Kate?
I don't remember, honestly.
Oh.
Did you really bump?
I can't remember.
Did you bump Julian for me? That was a mistake.
Sanchez?
No, I thought you had didn't you? Who do you have? You said yesterday.
No, I don't think we bumped anybody for you.
Maybe, or
no. Well, it was. We've been trying to
Zittrain.
We've been trying to schedule
Zittrain. You bumped Jonathan for me?
I mean, no, that was for you.
We double scheduled Jonathan and Susan. But don't worry.
We're trying to get him back on. Don't worry. It's fine.
We have so many people. Maybe tomorrow we should have either because either Tom Ridd or Camille Francois, both of whom have projects related. Maybe we should have them both tomorrow. Talk about active measures, historical and current. Camille's report is amazing, and Tom's book is amazing.
Which book?
And I think this book is called Active Measures. It's a history of Eastern Bloc influence operations, and it is incredible, just incredible.
A couple things. One, have you guys had Ann Applebaum on?
Anne wants to come on after her current book comes out in July, and she will talk about both.
Her piece was so amazing, I thought.
Yes, and Anne's piece. Anne also has a major league time difference because she's living in Poland. But she wants to come on and talk about both the new book and the piece. And so we've agreed to wait so that she can so that we can talk about both.
And the second thing I was just going to say is, if anything happens, if there are fireworks with Lambert tomorrow afternoon, and you want Jack or I to, we may actually be doing a podcast for Lawfare about it.
Yes, we are doing the Lawfare podcast tomorrow, which is why I am reading this book. I am reading it so that you guys can talk about the litigation and I can talk about the substance of what is.
So my suggestion is going to be maybe we should do it after the hearing, because it's like yesterday, we do this long post, and 40 minutes later they file a motion for a TRO, overtaken by events. So
that's a very good idea. Do you want to suggest that to Jacob, and he will?
I will. Yeah.
And we can reschedule it.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, this is how we do Lawfare. We plan it live on a show. Marty, thank you for joining us. Kate, we'll figure out what we're doing tomorrow. To all of you, this was fun. Come back sometime.
Kate, there's going to be like 15 more Supreme Court decisions we're going to have to parse.
Yeah, we need to do a roundup.
We've got Dahlia, Melissa Murray, Leah Littman.
It's going to be great.
Yeah, we've got a great roundup of people that are going to come in and talk to us about this. But we would love to add you into that, Marty. So please, I'll be in touch.
Okay. And until then, Kate, what do we say?
We don't have fun anymore. So in lieu of fun, we put national security advisors on horses back in the tube.
That's exactly right.
Not even the barn, in the tube.
In the tube.
I like that.
We need a toothpaste tube called National Security Advisors.
That was a riff on something that a friend sent me. Thank you, Michael. And but yes, it was thank you so much for coming on, Marty. This was a really
my
great
pleasure.
show.
Kate, and we're very proud to call Kate one of our alums. So
yes, I do. I went to Georgetown.
This is what happens to you if you come to our law school.
Right.